Friends, colleagues, and listeners, here we are. We've got a great session ahead of us today. My guest is Fabio Gamba, who's not a stranger to the show, and it's great to have you back, Fabio. Thank you very much for coming on board.
Well, thanks for the invitation. It's always good to be here.
Really, and otherwise, Fabio, you're always a breath of fresh air, my friend. So Fabio is the Director General of ASA, and the reason we're on now, it's a brand new year. There's been a few changes, and anybody or any organisation that embraces positive change is most definitely welcome on this particular show. And you guys have done that, so fair play to you. Now, what I'd like to start with is the recent press announcement. ASA ushers in a new era in aviation services, and there's going to be various changes. And well done for what they are. But what I'd like to do now for our listeners is if you could just quickly outline what those changes are, okay, and why it was important to bring them in at this particular time, especially.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Thank you, Chris, for the invite and for the good questions, because I guess, yeah, people are eager to know a little bit more about this announcement. So if that is fine with you, I'll start with the why and then I go to the what.
Yep.
I think it makes better sense like that. So I think with respect to the why we've made this announcement and what's in the backgrounds, what's behind this, I think it can be summarized for three reasons basically. That happens pretty much at the same time. The first one is definitely related to COVID-19, the pandemic, and the impact it's had on the industry, and in particular on ourselves. The second one is obviously strongly intertwined with the first one, which is the way that the authorities, the way that the whole community has reacted to the pandemic, and the fact that we've probably realized like never before how central we were for the good functioning of the air transport industry, and how little recognized we were given this centrality, right? And this was made even more obvious during COVID-19, and perhaps as well, and that's a little bit ironic, in the immediate aftermath of COVID-19, when things were supposed to recover, we then were suddenly faced with a number of disruptions at a number of airports, not only in Europe, but also North America, Oceania, and what have you. And that was, due to the fact that we had lost so many people in the meantime. Yeah. And then suddenly we were like, oh my God, if one element of the whole cogwheel doesn't work properly, then the whole system is penalized. And obviously, we were not the only elements to be responsible for the disruptions, far from that. But it's true that because of the fact that we had lost so many people, we had a number of challenges to face and to meet in order for this recovery to go as smooth as possible. And in some places, it didn't happen. So that was a second reason why we thought, we need to change things. And then perhaps the third reason, and it's something that started before the COVID-19, of course, is regulation. We're seeing more and more a number of member states from ICAO, a number of member states in the European Union, from the EU, thinking differently than they had in the past, and acknowledging the importance. So this is contradicting a little bit what I was saying before. The importance of ground handling for the safety of the whole system, and hence the necessity to have a specific regulation for ground handling. Now, I'm saying this as if this was coming up. It is coming up in some places, but we're still pretty far away from an ICAO annex on ground handling. I'm not even sure this is going to ever happen. What we see, though, is that to start with, in the European Union, we are having a dedicated regulation on that. And for all these three reasons, Chris, in a nutshell, I think what we realized that the good old ASA was not tooled anymore to face the three aspects, and especially turn itself into a vehicle that may help rather than react to these three different avenues.
Yeah. No, well done. Thank you for that explanation. And Fabio, if I may, and you know me, I'm pretty direct or straightforward as far as opinions, but I think the changes that you've identified there, people were becoming aware of them, but it's the underline of the COVID issue that's actually brought it home to roost. I mean, prior to that, the imbalance, shall we say, within the relationships within the industry was ever evident. And I know you've spoken many times and very articulately about the race to the bottom, cost-wise and stuff, and things just could not continue the way they were. And I think the old ASA was almost like a sort of like an elite or a big boys club, whereas I think what you're doing now is you're embracing a sector for the benefit of the sector and showing that the ASA committee and the ASA group actually cares about that particular sector and cares about the whole industry, which is why it needs to become one of those triangular points in the tripartite of influence and impact, whereby it joins the airlines and the airports, on equal measure.
Well, I mean, thanks for that, Chris. I mean, it's always interesting to acknowledge and see how we are being perceived from outside. And if the old ASA, as you call it, was giving the impression that it was a boys' club or something, I think that obviously perception is always matters, and probably we made a number of things wrong. But it's true that I think COVID-19, as you put that, has accelerated a number of things, and we realized that we need to be sitting at the same table in this tripod that you mentioned. Now, saying this at this stage is one thing, making it a reality is going to be another thing. And obviously, if you'd asked us the question 10 years ago, we would probably have made the same answer, i.e., yes, it is important that we sit at the same table. The difference, I guess, with 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, or for that matter, even just before COVID-19, is that we realized that perhaps the approach consisting of only looking at independent ground handling companies was perhaps the wrong one and probably was too little. Even though independent ground handlers are taking more and more important shares, and this will continue in the years to come. We know this, we have numbers on that. We are closer to 65% of the market share at this stage. This is not what matters in the end. We're all ground handling companies, and I would even say, and that's the motto of the new ASA, it's not only about ground handling. It is about aviation service provision, right? So this tripod that you mentioned is exactly this. You have the airlines on the one side, you have the airports on the other side, and you must have a strong and united aviation service provision front to close the loop and to constitute this tripod. Now, aviation service provision is a very large and wide term. What does it mean? Obviously, ground handling service provision is going to constitute, a major proponent or a major element of that. But we can think of the ISOs, we can think of onboard catering companies, we can think of cleaners, we can think of tankers, fuelers, and what have you. So it's a whole range of activities that may fall under the brand or the label of aviation service provision, but we really mean it. It is in our articles of associations. We've changed the definition, and we're now calling on all the aviation service providers to join. So the approach is really different, right?
No, and I think
so. If
sorry, Fabio, where you go?
No, just to. You had asked me a question about the what, so I thought it was the good moment to talk about what we envisage doing. because again, it's good to have nice slogans and proclaims, but I think what we're going to try and do in the very future is first and foremost to reach out to a much wider community than we had in the past, and perhaps the perception of us being a old boys club was related to the fact that we were narrowing down or reaching out to a small number of companies. This time will be different. We realize that things have changed, times have changed, and we need to have a much wider approach. So we're going to reach out to all the companies that I mentioned before. That's the first thing. To do what? Well, obviously, we realize that an association is an association. The way it works is pretty much, I would say, the same. It is predicated on three aspects. One is advocacy, and advocacy is hugely important, especially now that we have the regulation coming up, at least in some parts of the world. But we already know for sure that ICAO is more than looking at it, is actually establishing working groups, of which we are part of, to first start with SMS, but then it will continue with other aspects, regulating, if you will, ground handling and other aspects as well. So advocacy is obviously essential. Another thing that is absolutely key is programs. How can we add value to everyone? And that's going to be one of the major challenges that we are going to face in the future. And it's a nice challenge to have, I must say, because the more diverse your membership is, the more directions you will be asked to follow. And that's going to be the difficulty here with expanding secretariats, because we're going to have more means. With expanding secretariats, we will need to strike the right balance between expectations of the various members and making sure that these programs add real value to a large chunk of the membership. So there is no magic wand here or magic recipe. It's just a matter for us to make sure that we're keeping in line with the strategic priorities that we'll have to organize. And in this, and this is one of the novelties of the association, we have created a different layered, let's say, decision-making body with a strategic board, or a supervisory board, as we call it, whereby you have the top people of a number of companies, really the top of the top. We're talking about the CEO here. And then you'll have a chamber which will accompany the secretariat in its tasks and functions. And this chamber is called the operating board, and will be done or will be populated by, if you will, the right arms of the CEOs. Those operational people who are themselves responsible in their own companies, respective companies, of making sure that decisions are being implemented. Right? So this is different than in the past. So we're making sure that we have both the decision makers at the highest level, and second, that we have the implementators, the doers, right, to carry on and to parallel the secretariat's needs. And then we'll have, of course, a secretariat that would be more than simply half a person's job. And then the third aspect, and I'll finish on this, Chris, the third aspect, which is not coming third in terms of importance, I think all the three aspects are crucially and equally important, is, I will call it communication with a big C, the capital C, in which I will also include the fact that the association will develop the capacity to organize its own events. This is crucially important. For too long now, we've been trying to organize ourselves in terms of how we can meet, how we can interact with our customers, how we can interact within the little world of transport and aviation and ground handling and what have you, and aviation service provision. And it doesn't really work. It's always frustrating because you're depending on too many factors that you do not control. And more, we realize that ASA needs to be abreast of this thing, needs to control that, and hence will give itself the means to organize regional and worldwide events for the sake of the industry that it represents.
And it needs to be visible. It needs to be visible all around the network if you're going to look at having a global membership, which is important. Now, thank you for that, Fabio. And I think the big difference now is the way you're moving forward as a group and a group of individuals and companies is that you've managed to achieve the recognition and the credibility as well as the agility during the toughest times the industry has ever experienced. And as a result of that, like you said, your value as a sector has gone right up because people have realised now, where the sweat and tears are actually produced. And I think it's a great opportunity now collectively to realign some of the old ways of thinking, and also as part of that realignment, make the business a lot more simpler and a lot more easy to manage. And by doing that, having the sustainability side of the business, which is so important, because in the past, and I've said so many times, we and I've worked on both sides, so as a carrier and as a GHA, on the carrier side, we managed things. It was easy to make things complex, and if you look at it the other way around, it's hard to make things easy. And that standardization and guidelines and code of conduct, code of practice, whatever you want. Now is the time to do things a lot simpler because of the pressures on personnel and safety issues now and all the training issues. Now is the time to agree to do things in a standardized way. And, I've said many times on various podcasts, and even when I was there myself as a carrier, we were too demanding and too over cautious with SLAs and contractual guidelines and what was expected and minimum numbers. And the GHAs basically didn't really have a good chance at all. And because of that race to the bottom and the need to maintain the business, people were saying yes far too many times. So hopefully that will start to realign now, and there'll be a modicum of common sense that goes back into the business.
Well, if you're touching on these topics, I could, I guess, speak for the whole day. Suffice it to say that I think, again, COVID-19, as I call it, has been the great awakening of the industry, in which we were constantly complaining about the race to the bottom without doing anything to change that. And throughout discussions and with sheer numbers, we can see that this policy brought us where we were during the COVID-19, in that we were all sawing the branch on which we were sitting. And not only us, GHSPs, ground handling service providers, or the aviation service provision in its ensemble in general, but the airlines in particular as well. They were at the forefront of this race to the bottom. And the good thing is, I think they did realize that it could not be that simple. And so I think, of course, the future will tell us if things have really changed. For the time being, what we're concentrating on is really what we can control, i.e. ourselves, and what we want to offer to our members. That's why we want to reach out to all of them. And we're going to do that with the small team that we have. We're going to do that in the coming weeks and months. But also, crucially important, we have started already, obviously, but I think we will do that in a slightly different way and perspective. Our discussion with the likes of IATA and ACI will be held in different perspective. Not to say that we will be more confrontational, because that's not the idea. On the contrary, we want to help them help themselves, right? Before we can help us as well. And in that, we realized that things like the Great Resignation were things that we had to fight together, and not them on their side and us on our own side, and each of us producing their own white papers and then repeating what the others were saying. I think it doesn't make much sense. We're also seeing that with the regulation coming up here, in Europe. We have many more converging views than we have divergencies. And whenever we have converging views, we ought to be able to say the things together. Perhaps in the past, IATA or ACI or the likes didn't care that much of making sure that they would have the voices of the aviation service providers with them. I think this is slowly changing, and even more so with the new ASA. At least that is the hope.
Yeah. No. I think, and it's valid, Fabio, as well. And a couple of the things that obviously you have to focus on now in the immediate term is to get the attention and the understanding and the awareness of the larger group that potentially are going to be the new membership, because that level of clarity is so important, so they can see immediately what the strength and the benefits would be of joining. And then collectively as a group, it's the competence levels that have to be lifted now within the industry, not just from a safety perspective, but overall business sustainability, and also the future succession of the business. Where are the next generations coming from, and why would they want to come into the business? And how do you help them feel as if they're being listened to and recognized, and all the other motivational elements that are necessary these days. But the starts, I think, the green shoots now, it's very positive, Fabio, and well done to all of you, because that change needed to be done. And also you mentioned there about the CEOs and the doers. That's what other people would also look at, as when you see certain associations and boards and meetings, that you look at who attends, who can actually make the decisions, and whether or not the attendance generates good decisions, and whether or not those decisions are put into place. So if that starts to materialize, I think the momentum and the speed, could be quite substantial moving forward. And especially as this year isn't going to be the most relaxing as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely right. Commitment from the members is absolutely essential if any organization or association wants to achieve anything. So that's what we're putting forward as well. We've been telling, and we're going to continue to repeat that, an association without the commitment of its members is worth nothing. And the good thing is, and I hope this is really, what is going to differentiate us eventually from the old boys club that you mentioned before, is that in the end, the association is just what you put into it as a member. So commitment for the members is absolutely important. And in that, the very signal that we have at the supervisory board, the top CEOs, with us, is sending a very, very strong signal that indeed the commitment is there. And it's not only I'm there, I'm speaking for 2 hours, and then I turn the page and I can forget what has been said and done during those last 2 hours. No, because when you have the CEOs, then it circulates internally as well in each and every organizations who are members of the ASA, and then it continues. And that's why we have to do is as well accompanying them. So I think we are shaped in a way that will trigger this commitment that is so important to any association.
Yeah, no, Fabio, I agree, and I think you've outlined a good storyline now, and the reasons and the whys and all the characters that are important to make a good storyline, and you've also mapped out the journey, and the speed of that is a lot down to how quickly everybody understands and conceives the changes. So, I think it bodes well for 2023, especially for ASA. And I think the other point earlier as well is being independent in what you want to do and how you want to express it and represent it, by having the ability to do your own meetings, sessions, conferences, travels, etc. Excuse me. I think that's also so important as well. So the PR and the clarity of the message and the communications, that's going to make a big difference as well. So good on you, sir. Well done. And I look forward to catching up again with yourself and maybe with Attila, and seeing how things are actually going and what's been cemented now, and what's there in the foundations for a good positive future and recognised sector.
Well, thanks, Chris, for that, and thanks for having us. And I would say watch this space. Stay tuned.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure, my friend. And just to finish, over the times that we've met, I've enjoyed watching your plant grow and blossom. So there's a lot of TLC goes into that. So if the same TLC goes into the new asset, I think it's definitely going to be successful.
I hope so. Thank you very much, Chris.